The boots hit the wooden planks like hammers. The Texas sun bled orange across the ranch as dust curled around the boots of the last soldier standing. Across from him, a Japanese woman in a patched uniform stood motionless, her hair pinned back with a red ribbon that did not belong to her. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. 10 paces apart, neither moved. A breeze passed. The cowboy stepped forward, lowered his hat, and whispered 3 words. What followed, within seconds, froze every man watching. Even the ranch dogs stopped barking. No one had expected this. Not from him, not from her. She blinked, once. A breath hitched in her throat. And then she did something that broke every rule of war. But before we get to what he said, or why it shattered everything, we need to go back to the day she arrived barefoot, clutching nothing but a broken comb, and the red ribbon she refused to let go of. The truck's brakes hissed like a snake struck in the throat. Then the wooden plank dropped, hitting the Texas dirt with a low, cracking thud. Dust rose, catching sunlight in its swirl. She was the last to step down, bare feet hitting the dry, packed earth like paper slapping stone. Blood bloomed instantly across the pads of her feet, her soles thin from months of concrete and ash. A breeze lifted the hem of her uniform, revealing knees scabbed raw, but her hand stayed closed in a fist. Inside it, the ribbon. It was the color of dried plum skin, red once, now fading toward brown. The edge had curled and blackened as if it had tasted fire. The bow had long since come undone. It was just a loop of fraying silk, but she held it like a thread that kept her from vanishing. The cowboys leaned on the fence posts, arms crossed. One spat. Another blinked slow and muttered, "Jesus, she's just a kid." To the left, a horse flicked its tail and let out a long exhale. The girl flinched, at the sound, her shoulders hitching high before she forced them down again. She scanned the land. No buildings made of concrete, no sirens, no soldiers barking in clipped Japanese. Just hay bales the size of dead trucks, fencing that stretched until it blurred into heat waves. And beyond the barn, a squat structure with a crooked weather vane, there was the shimmer of barbed wire. The wind here didn't carry smoke. It smelled like horses, manure, sunburnt wood, and something greasy on a skillet. Her stomach tightened, not from hunger, from the wrongness of it. A man in a beige uniform stepped forward with a clipboard. "Next," he said flatly. She did not understand the word, but she understood the motion of his hand. She stepped forward. The barn had been turned into a clinic, if clinic meant a table with a sheet of tin, a cot, and a scale that creaked when stepped on. The medic, a boy really, no older than her brother had been, pointed. She stepped onto the scale. The needle twitched, then stilled. He squinted. 68, he muttered. Maybe. One of the ranchers exhaled through his nose. "That ain't a soldier. That's a scarecrow." She stood silent as the medic lifted her sleeve. Her arm was lighter than the stethoscope. The skin was dry, flaking. Her elbow looked like a broken hinge. He measured her pulse. Slow, shallow, like a candle behind glass. The ribbon stayed wrapped in her palm, even when he asked her to open her hand. He didn't push. He just noted the burns, the slight tremor in her wrist, and moved on. Her ribs showed like floorboards in a broken house. He counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. Each one a rung on a ladder down to hunger. He offered her a cup of water. She didn't take it, not until he placed it on the cot and turned away. Then she bent slowly, picked it up with her free hand, and sipped. The tin was cool against her lip. The water was soft, with no iron tang, no ash, no blood. She drank it, all. She did not sit. She did not speak. She did not let go of the ribbon. Behind her, someone swept hay with a wooden broom. The sound dragged across the barn like distant thunder. The horses in the stalls shifted. Flies buzzed. The cowboy with the clipboard leaned in and asked someone else how to spell her name. Kiyomi, a translator answered quietly. He scratched it down. K-Y? The girl didn't correct him. By the time they motioned her to the far stall where she'd sleep, the sun had dipped far enough to set the dust glowing. It looked like gold, but it wasn't. She knew what gold looked like burning. She had seen it fall from the sky. As she walked, a trail of blood dotted behind her, small prints, spaced neatly, each one shaped like the edge of a calligraphy brush. Still, she kept her shoulders square. Still, she kept the ribbon in her grip. She had nothing else. That night, the barn walls creaked with the wind. Rough planks let cold fingers of air curl across the dirt floor, carrying with them the sharp scent of manure, rusted metal, and burnt mesquite from the stove outside. Kiyomi sat near the cattle stalls, her back against a feed bin, knees drawn to her chest. The ribbon was still in her hand, not tied, just resting in her palm, its edges curling like dry leaves. The cows shifted slowly behind her. One exhaled, sending a warm, grassy breath across her shoulder. The animal's bulk radiated heat. She stayed still, not relaxed, never that, but still. Her bare feet rested on hay-strewn wood, the splinters too dull to pierce. The blood had dried along the outside edge of her foot in a crescent. She tightened her grip on the ribbon. It stuck slightly. Her palm was slick with sweat. The silk had darkened from the pressure of her fingers, but it was still there. It had made it through worse. The last time she wore it, the air had been quiet. No sirens, no warnings. Morning light had filtered through broken roof slats and lit the floorboards like stained glass. Her brother, Satoru, had helped her pin the ribbon into her braid. He made a joke about it. She didn't laugh, but she let him see her smile. Then came the light. A flash, brighter than anything she'd ever known, like the sun had opened its eyes all at once. It burned through her eyelids even after they squeezed shut. She remembered heat that bent walls inward, the scream of glass collapsing. Then ash, so much ash it felt like the air itself had caught fire. She couldn't find her brother. She shouted his name until her throat bled. The streets melted. The smell, fat and stone, something cooking that should never cook. She woke under a makeshift tarp, her arms wrapped in gauze. Her hair was half singed away. The ribbon had fused into the strands behind her ear, melted slightly, stuck in place. A nurse peeled it away with shaking hands and said nothing. She kept it. Even then, a noise snapped her back. Boots on gravel outside the barn door, slow, measured. She looked up as it creaked open. A cowboy stepped inside, silhouetted by firelight. Tall, shoulders broad, hat tilted low. He didn't speak, just walked a few steps in, paused, and took off his gloves. His eyes found her in the dim, not her face, her hands. The ribbon was loose now, laid across her knees like a bandage. Her arms, half lit by the glow slipping through the boards, showed their scars. The burns ran like vines, some smooth and shiny, others puckered like overcooked dough. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. He bent down, picked up a metal pail, and began pouring feed into the trough beside the cows. The grain rustled like dry rain. His movements were steady, practiced. One of the cows bumped his hip. He chuckled, low and rasped, like a fence post dragged through gravel. He looked at her again. This time, not at her hands, but her eyes. Then he nodded. Just once, slow, like he saw something he recognized. She didn't nod back, but her fingers unclenched slightly. The ribbon slid down her leg. The cowboy replaced the pail and walked out without saying a word. The door thudded closed behind him, and the darkness returned. Outside, a coyote called once, then again. Kiyomi picked up the ribbon and brought it to her nose. It didn't smell like fire anymore. It smelled like hay, like sweat, like this strange, confusing place. She tied it into her braid again, just above the nape of her neck, the ends fraying where the silk had burned. The knot wasn't tight, but it held. In the morning, the air inside the barn was heavy with steam and wood smoke. A stovepipe hissed quietly from the far wall, pushing out the scent of wet ash and something else. Thicker, meatier. The scent slithered through the cracks in the boards and settled into her nose before she opened her eyes. Kiyomi sat up slowly. The blanket slipped off her shoulders and her back prickled against the sudden cold. She touched the ribbon tied at the base of her braid. It had loosened in the night but held its shape, though one of the burnt ends curled like a dead leaf. Outside, boots crunched over gravel. A shadow passed across the slats. Then the barn door opened with a groan. A soldier, not the cowboy from the night before, but someone younger with hair too neat to belong to the ranch, stepped in holding a chipped tin bowl. Steam curled upward from its lip. He didn't speak. He just placed it on the crate near her bed and left. The door closed again with a heavy, uneven thud. She stared at the bowl. The soup was thick, brown and glistening, with pale beans floating in slow circles like bloated rafts. Slivers of something red and stringy clung to the sides. Bacon, maybe. Or something trying to be bacon. The smell was sharp. Onions, grease, salt. It gripped her throat before she could swallow. She reached for it with both hands. The metal was hot, and she hissed through her teeth. She set it back down, then tried again, wrapping the hem of her sleeve around one palm to lift it. The surface shimmered. When she brought it close, the scent punched into her skull. Her stomach twisted. It was too much, too loud. Back home, soup had been gray water and rice husks, thin as memory. This was heavy. She brought it to her lips, tilted it slightly, then froze. A strand of red silk floated near the rim. The ribbon. It had dipped in, unnoticed, one of its frayed ends now darkened with broth, curling like it had absorbed the heat. She pulled it free, fast. Drops of soup flung onto her lap, staining her uniform in brown splatters. She clutched the ribbon tight in one hand and wiped it against her sleeve with short, desperate strokes. The fabric squeaked. A film of grease shimmered across her forearm. She set the bowl aside. Her breath came in bursts now, small, sharp exhales. Across the barn, another girl, a woman, really, maybe 20, glanced at her, then turned away. The others had begun to avoid her. She had noticed it yesterday when they were herded past the stables. No one walked beside her. Burned girls were considered cursed, marked by fire, marked by shame. The woman near the stall muttered something in Japanese to the girl beside her, who immediately looked down. Kiyomi didn't respond. She dipped a corner of her blanket in the water basin near her cot and dabbed at the ribbon again. Then she sat down, knees folded, and laid the ribbon across her thigh. It was darker now, stiff in places. The broth had clung to the weave. She waited until the fabric dried, just enough to curl again at the tips, then looped it around her wrist. Once, then twice, then tucked the end through the knot. It was too thick to tie neatly, but it held. It held. She picked up the soup again. This time she didn't bring it to her lips. She just sat with it, watching the steam rise, letting it fog her vision, The sun shifted across the floorboards. Outside, a chicken clucked somewhere near the haystack. A cowboy laughed. A door slammed. Inside, she sat with her ribbon, her soup, and the silence of being watched, but not spoken to. She took one sip, then gagged. It wasn't the taste, it was the heat, the oil, the suddenness of flavor. Her throat wasn't used to swallowing anything that rich. Still, she didn't drop the bowl. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose, and waited, then took another sip. By the time the bowl was empty, her stomach felt swollen and her tongue buzzed with salt. She curled up beneath the blanket again. Her hands gripped the ribbon at her wrist. The silk had dried stiff. It scratched lightly against her pulse. She didn't untie it. She wouldn't. On the morning of the fourth day, a sharp metallic clatter echoed through the barn like a gunshot. It came from a wooden crate beside the pump. A soldier, not the same one who brought soup, tossed down a small folding knife, its blade already half open, catching the sunlight as it spun once and landed blade up on a folded burlap sack. Next to it sat a pail of dirt-flecked potatoes and a tin basin filled with water. Kiyomi didn't move. The man didn't speak either. He gestured once, quick and sharp, then turned on his heel and left. The barn door groaned closed behind him, leaving her in silence except for the low chewing of the cows and the steady creak of rope swaying from a hanging feed bucket. She walked slowly toward the knife. Her feet, now wrapped in socks with holes near the toes, shuffled across straw and grit. The blade wasn't large, maybe 3 inches, but it gleamed like a mirror. She stopped beside the crate, her fingers flexed. She looked down at her wrist. The ribbon was still there, looped twice and tied tight, the knot sitting just above the vein. The fabric had stiffened overnight where the soup had dried into it, and now it scraped lightly with every movement, a gentle reminder with every pulse. She reached for the knife. The wood handle was warm from the sun, smooth and polished along the edges, splintered at the base. She lifted it carefully, eyes narrowing as the edge caught a sliver of her reflection. Her face looked foreign, thinner than she remembered. She turned to the potatoes. They were thick, knobby things with eyes sprouting and dirt packed into their skin. She picked one up. It was cool, solid. She pressed it against the crate to steady it, then brought the blade down. The sound of the peel lifting was soft, like paper tearing slowly. She dragged the knife down again, this time faster. The rhythm came quickly. Cut, drag, turn, cut, drag, turn. She didn't realize she was breathing fast until her wrist started to throb. Halfway through the third potato, the knife slipped. Just a tremble, too much pressure. The blade caught the side of her thumb and drew a thin red line. She froze. Blood welled, bright against the paleness of her skin. A single drop slid down and hit the ribbon. It bloomed, red over red, but darker, thicker. The silk absorbed it without hesitation, like it had been waiting. She dropped the potato. It thudded against the dirt floor and rolled into the corner. Her other hand closed over the ribbon, tight, as if holding it could stop the spread. She looked around. Near the barn door, a figure leaned against the post. The cowboy, the same one who had nodded on the first night. Same hat, same sun-darkened skin. He didn't speak. He didn't move, just watched. Their eyes met. He glanced down, just once, at her hand clutching the ribbon, then back at her face. No judgment, no alarm. She lowered her gaze first and wiped the blood on her skirt, then picked up another potato. The cut stung, now, every time she moved. But she didn't stop. Slice, drag, slice. Each new peel fell into the basin with a soft splash, floating like curled shavings of paper. By the time the bucket was full, her fingers ached, and her knuckles had gone white. The cowboy was gone. No words, no orders, no praise, just silence. The knife sat beside the basin, its edge now dull with starch, and her blood barely visible in the groove where metal met wood. She folded the ribbon down over the stain, hiding it beneath the knot, then tightened it, just enough to hold. The morning opened without voices, no boots on gravel, no barked orders, only the thin cry of a rooster and the soft, restless shifting of animals waking to heat. Sunlight slid through the gaps in the barn slats, laying pale stripes across the dirt floor like ribs. Kiyomi sat up slowly, testing the air. It smelled of grain and damp wood and something sweet, molasses maybe, spilled long ago and soaked into the boards. The ribbon was still there, tied at her wrist, stiff with dried blood and broth. She rubbed her thumb across it, feeling the uneven grain where the silk had burned thin. No one came. Minutes passed. Then more. The barn door stayed shut. No boots, no voices. The absence pressed louder than any order. She stood. Her feet met the dirt, cool and granular. She stepped forward, then stopped, listening. The cows shuffled in their stalls, their tails flicking lazily. A fly buzzed near her ear and landed on her wrist. She didn't flinch. The door to the chicken enclosure was unlatched. The hinge creaked as she nudged it open. Warm air rolled out, thick with feathers and grain dust. Hens clucked and scratched, their claws ticking against wood. She stepped inside. This was new. No one followed. The ground inside was soft, layered with straw and feathers, and droppings pressed flat by countless small feet. She crouched and reached for the feed sack leaning against the wall. It was heavier than she expected. When she tipped it, kernels rattled out in a dry, metallic rain. The hens rushed in, pecking at her boots, their beaks clicking sharp and fast. She flinched, then steadied herself. The ribbon brushed against her wrist as she scattered the feed. It caught on a splinter and tugged. She hissed softly and pulled it free, checking it with quick fingers. Still there. Still whole. The hens crowded closer, feathers brushing her ankles. One pecked her shin. She didn't pull away. Her breath slowed, matched the rhythm of their movements. Scatter, step back, scatter. Again! She forgot to listen for footsteps. Only when she straightened did she realize how quiet it was. No boots, no voices, no one watching. The air pressed in. Her heart began to hammer, not from fear, but from the sudden, terrifying understanding that she could leave. The gate to the far side of the enclosure was unlatched. Beyond it, the land stretched open. Fields, fence posts, the long line of the horizon blurred by heat. She could walk. The thought landed heavy in her chest. She took a step toward the gate. Then another. The ribbon brushed against her wrist, catching on a loose thread. She stopped. Her breath came quick now, shallow. She looked down at her hands, at the thin skin, the dirt in her nails, the small, familiar weight of the ribbon. If she ran, she would leave it behind, or it would tear, or it would be taken. She crouched suddenly, heart thudding, and pressed her palm flat to the dirt. It was warm, alive. The ground did not tremble. No sirens, no shouting, just the hum of insects and the distant creak of wood. She stayed. Minutes passed. She didn't know how many. When she stood again, the barn door creaked open behind her. She flinched, spinning around. The cowboy stood there, a sack of feed over his shoulder. He stopped short when he saw her inside the coop. They stared at each other. He did not reach for her, did not shout. He simply tipped the sack down and began pouring feed into the trough beside her, his movements slow, deliberate. The hens swarmed, dust rose. He stepped back and wiped his hands on his trousers. Then he noticed the ribbon. It was no longer at her wrist. Her breath caught. She looked down. Empty skin. The ribbon was gone. Her hands began to shake. She dropped to her knees and started pawing through the straw, fingers scraping, heart racing. Straw stuck to her palms. Her breathing grew sharp and uneven. She clawed at the ground, faster, frantic now. The cowboy stepped closer. He saw her hands. He saw the panic. He didn't touch her. He bent down and reached beneath the feed sack. Slowly, carefully, he lifted something from the dirt. The ribbon. Clean, folded, unstained. He held it out between two fingers. She froze. Then, with a shaking hand, she reached out and took it. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. The door closed behind him with a soft click. She pressed the ribbon to her chest and sank down onto the straw, breathing hard, the scent of grain and dust filling her lungs. The barn felt quieter now, not empty, not watched, just still. Later that afternoon, the sun sat high and angry, turning the dirt outside the barn into cracked, sun-bleached clay. The air shimmered at the edges of the ranch yard like the ground was breathing. From her place in the shade near the water trough, Kiyomi squinted toward the corrals. The Americans were saddling the horses for a midday ride. The leather groaned under their hands as they tugged at straps and adjusted stirrups. Dust stuck to their arms in patches, sweat soaking into the cotton of their shirts. She sat cross-legged in the straw, her back against a fence post. The ribbon was in her front pocket now, folded, tucked neatly into the threadbare lining. It brushed against her hip with every shift of movement. Then it happened. One of the younger men, a lanky one with a sunburned nose and boots too big, looped the saddle wrong. As he yanked the cinch tight, the whole rig slipped off the side of the horse. The animal bucked slightly, and the man stumbled backward. His boot caught on the rail, and he went down hard in a swirl of red dust. His hat flew off. The other cowboys burst into laughter, loud, open. A kind of sound that bounced off the walls and landed in the gut. Not cruel, just real. The kind of laughter that exists outside war. And without thinking, before memory could rise to stop it, Kiyomi laughed too. It came out high and sudden, like a hiccup, shocking even her. Her mouth snapped shut instantly, her hand flying to her face, but the sound had already left. Heads turned, her cheeks flushed, the heat rising up her neck. The cowboys didn't jeer. One of them raised an eyebrow. Another gave a half-smile. The one who had fallen, now brushing dirt from his knees, chuckled again as he reached for his hat. But Kiyomi was no longer watching them. Her fingers dove for her pocket. Empty. The ribbon was gone. She stood, quick, too quick, her head spun from the motion. She dropped to a crouch and began searching the straw and dirt, fingers sifting, through pebbles and feed dust. Her breath came short, sharp. Her knees dug into the cracked earth, stones pressing into her skin through the thin fabric. She didn't find it. Then a shadow fell over her. She looked up. The cowboy with the square jaw and quiet eyes, the same one who had watched her with the potatoes, the one who'd handed her back the ribbon in the coop, stood there. He didn't speak. In his hand, the ribbon. It hung between his fingers, limp and dusty, the crease still visible from her pocket. But he didn't hand it back. He just looked at it, then at her. Something passed between them, not words, not even expression, just the weight of recognition. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her palms. She didn't reach for it. He didn't offer. Instead, he tucked it into the breast pocket of his shirt, carefully, deliberately, then turned and walked back toward the corral. Kiyomi didn't follow. She stayed rooted to the spot, her breath uneven, her chest tight. The laughter was gone now. The yard had quieted again, save for the whinny of a horse and the scrape of metal on wood. Her hands hung useless at her sides. The ribbon had always been with her, in her hair, on her wrist, in her pocket. Now it was somewhere else, visible, exposed, in someone else's keeping. And for the first time since Nagasaki, she didn't know if she wanted it back. The wind came like a warning. It started as a low hum rolling through the fence posts, rattling dry leaves on the edge of the pasture. Then it grew teeth. By midday, it was snapping cloth from lines and flinging dust across the yard in sheets that stung the eyes. Horses bucked in their stalls. Chickens shrieked and scattered. The sky was the color of old bruises, purple, gray, smeared with charcoal clouds that moved too fast. The air turned electric, metallic on the tongue, like licking the back of a battery. Kiyomi pressed her hands to the edge of the coop door, holding it closed against the sudden gusts. Her arms trembled with the force. The hens squawked behind her, feathers swirling like torn paper. A shovel clattered to the ground outside and bounced once before disappearing in the mud. Then came the rain. It dropped in fat, violent slabs, striking the tin roof in bursts that sounded like rifle fire. The walls of the coop groaned under the weight. Water spilled through the ceiling cracks. The floor turned to sludge. A gust tore the latch free, slamming the coop door open. Wind rushed in, scattering feed sacks, flipping over the basin, sending straw into the air like a swarm of locusts. Kiyomi ducked, shielding her face with both arms. She staggered out into the storm. Her feet sank into cold mud. The wind ripped at her sleeves, plastering the thin fabric against her skin. She moved blindly toward the barn, her eyes nearly shut, her body bent forward against the storm. The barn door was half open, banging loudly against the frame. She gripped it and shoved herself inside. Darkness. Then movement. A figure. The cowboy. He stood near the center of the barn, soaked to the bone, a stack of wool blankets cradled in his arms. His shirt clung to him, sleeves rolled to the elbow, water dripping from the brim of his hat. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like he'd been fighting the wind himself. Kiyomi's eyes scanned him, then stopped. There, tucked into the pocket of his shirt, barely peeking out, the ribbon, still folded, still dry. He had kept it. She stepped forward slowly, her boots squelched with every step, water seeping out of the seams. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, not entirely. He looked at her, then looked down. He didn't move. The barn shuddered. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the rafters. Dust rained down from the beams. Kiyomi reached up. Her fingers were red from the cold. She took the ribbon from his pocket gently, like lifting a fragile piece of silk from a shrine. He let her. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect it. She turned her back to him and stepped toward the lantern hanging near the wall. Its flame danced violently in the draught, casting their shadows like ghosts across the walls. With slow, deliberate fingers, she began to tie the ribbon into her hair. The silk was stiff in places, but not ruined. She smoothed it with her thumbs, then wove it through the end of her braid. The knot came easily, muscle memory. The last time she had tied it like this, she had stood in the ruins of a wooden house, while the world behind her burned orange. This time there was only rain. Behind her, the cowboy returned to folding the blankets, stacking them near the stove one by one, steam rising off the wool in faint tendrils. Kiyomi stayed where she was, braid dripping, ribbon tied, hands at her sides. The storm kept howling, but the ribbon held. The sky had cleared by evening, leaving behind a pink wash, smeared low across the horizon like someone had dragged their fingers through watercolor. The dirt outside was thick with footprints and puddles. Somewhere near the barn, steam still rose from the troughs, where rainwater had collected and warmed again under the returning sun. From the ranch house, music floated across the yard, faint at first, then clearer. A fiddle, loose and lively. A harmonica joined it, slightly off-key, but full of joy. Boots stomped the floorboards in rhythm, and the screen door banged open and shut as people moved in and out. Kiyomi sat beneath the eaves of the tool shed, her knees pulled up, arms wrapped tight around her legs. The ribbon, now dried, rested against the back of her neck, knotted firm into her braid. Each strand of silk caught the last of the fading light. The music tugged at her, not loudly, not demandingly, just enough to remind her that something was happening beyond the silence she'd grown used to. She didn't stand. Not at first. A group of the other girls passed her, laughing, fixing their hair with quick fingers, adjusting the hems of their borrowed skirts. One paused and looked down. "They said we could watch," she offered, not unkindly. Then they were gone, their boots squelching in the soft dirt as they made for the house. Kiyomi listened. She could hear the shuffle of feet on wood, a man's voice singing something she didn't recognize, the clink of bottles, more laughter, then boots coming toward her. She looked up. It was the same cowboy, the one with quiet eyes and hands that always held things like they might break. He didn't speak. Instead, he extended his hand, palm up, fingers loose, no command in it, no pressure, just the question. Kiyomi stared. Her fingers tightened against her legs. She shook her head once, barely. He didn't withdraw. Instead, slowly, gently, he reached past her ear, not touching her skin, and adjusted, the ribbon where it had come slightly undone. Just one movement, delicate, like fixing the collar on a child's coat. She exhaled, shaky. Her knees trembled. Then, without knowing why, she reached out. Her hand fit in his like it was always meant to. He didn't grip, didn't tug, just held. The wood porch creaked as they stepped inside. The room was warm, yellow-lit, thick with the scent of tobacco, sweat, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. Candles flickered in glass jars. The floor vibrated with each stomp. No one stopped to stare. A few glanced. One nodded. The cowboy guided her, not to the center, but to the edge, close enough to feel the rhythm, not be consumed by it. She didn't know the steps, didn't try. He moved slowly, gently, letting her lead without knowing. His hand stayed at her waist, light as breath. His other remained in hers, never tightening. She let the ribbon show. For the first time, she didn't adjust it, didn't hide it beneath a cap or tuck it inside her shirt. It trailed slightly as they turned, catching the candlelight, dancing in time. And when the song ended, he didn't let go until she did. They didn't speak. He tipped his hat, and she walked back out into the night, braid swaying, ribbon shining like a flag in the wind. By dawn, the world was still. Mist curled low over the corral, drifting in slow tendrils between the slats of the fence. The horses were quiet, backs steaming, tails twitching lazily, hooves sunk deep in straw-matted mud from the storm 2 nights before. The scent of wet earth mixed with the sharper tang of manure and cedar posts. Kiyomi stepped barefoot from the bunkhouse, her soles used to the texture now, cool planks, then dewy grass, then packed dirt. A pail swung gently in her hand, half filled with feed. She blinked against the pale blue of morning. The ribbon had held through the night, still braided in, still tight. She walked toward the coop, trailing her fingers across the rough wooden siding. Chickens rustled and muttered behind the wire, beaks clacking, feet scratching impatiently. And then she stopped. The cowboy was there. He stood just outside the coop, one boot resting lightly against the bottom rail of the pen, hat tipped forward. He wasn't leaning, wasn't imposing, just waiting. In his hands, cradled like something sacred, was a box, small, square, unvarnished. The lid was carved, not fancy, just enough to notice. A curling edge, a bevel worn smooth from touch. She could see the marks where a blade had shaped the corners. He held it out. No words yet, just the box. Kiyomi stepped forward slowly, one foot after the other, breath catching in her throat. The mist drifted between them like ghosts, with nowhere left to haunt. Her fingers hovered above the lid. He gave a nod. She lifted it. Inside, the ribbon lay like a sleeping thing. It had been cleaned, completely. The char at the edge had been trimmed, stitched neatly with red thread that nearly matched the silk. Someone had taken the time. Someone had seen the damage and made it whole again. She touched the stitch. The thread caught slightly under her nail. The silk was smooth again, creased only where it had been folded, but whole. Reborn. Then, finally, his voice. 3 words, soft, plain. No poetry, no explanation, but they dropped between them like a bell ringing in the chest. Kiyomi didn't blink, didn't breathe. She looked at him, then down, then closed the box slowly, gently. Not with fear, not with haste, with care. She didn't say anything, not with her mouth, but her hands moved, slow, sure. She undid the braid. The ribbon slipped free, and for the first time since the fire, she let it fall fully open, long, red, trembling slightly in the breeze. Then she tied it again, not hidden, not tucked away, but at the base of her neck, over her shoulder, bold as a banner. He didn't reach for it this time. He just stepped back once, nodding, then turned toward the barn. The mist was lifting now. Light spilled through the fence slats, warming the dirt 1 inch at a time. Kiyomi stood in it, the box still in her hand, the ribbon whispering against her collarbone. And though the words had been simple, the world had shifted, like wind changing direction, like a match in a dark cave, like something lost that had, somehow, returned. The door to the mess hall creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the room was already full. Long wooden tables ran end to end, scarred with years of knife marks and burn rings. Tin cups clinked softly. The smell of coffee, bread, and grease hung thick in the air, warm and heavy. Men sat shoulder to shoulder, boots hooked on chair rungs, sleeves rolled up, voices low. The sound stopped when she stepped inside. Not all at once, just enough to notice. A fork paused mid-air. A chair scraped softly, then froze. Someone cleared their throat and didn't finish the sound. The hush moved through the room like a held breath. She walked forward. The ribbon was tied high at the base of her neck, the red catching the light from the bare bulbs above. It moved when she walked, a soft flick against her collarbone. Clean, whole, undamaged. The silk glowed against the faded fabric of her borrowed shirt. Every eye followed it. She reached the center table and stopped. Her hands did not shake. They did. Not hurry. She placed the small wooden box on the table between the plates and cups. It made a quiet sound, solid, deliberate. The room held its breath. She lifted the lid. Inside lay the ribbon's twin, the faint crease where it had once been folded, the careful stitch along its edge, the mark where a burn had once eaten into it, now made smooth by thread. The smell of clean cotton drifted up. Soap, wood smoke, something warm. She closed the box. No one spoke. She turned toward the man who stood near the back wall. He hadn't moved since she entered. His hat was off now, held low in both hands. His eyes met hers. The room was so quiet that the sound of a spoon sliding off a plate at the far end seemed to echo. She took one step forward, then another. Her boots struck the floor in measured beats. When she reached him, she stopped. He did not speak. He didn't need to. She lifted the box and held it out. He didn't take it. Instead, he said the words, softly, plainly, without ceremony. "It's still yours." The words landed not like sound, but like weight. For a moment nothing moved. Then she nodded once, slow and deliberate. She turned back to the table, set the box down, and slid it to the center. She did not open it again. The ribbon was hers now, whether she held it or not. She took her place on the bench. No one told her where to sit. She chose. The wood was rough beneath her palms, still warm from the last body that had rested there. Someone pushed a bowl toward her. Another slid over a cup. No one spoke. No one needed to. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Dust moved in thin lines along the ground. The day carried on. She lifted the cup, brought it to her lips, and drank. Across the room, a man let out a breath he'd been holding. Another nodded, almost imperceptibly. Someone cleared a throat and began to eat. The sound of life resumed. The ribbon lay in its box, unmoving. But its presence filled the room, not as a symbol of suffering, not as a relic, but as proof. Proof that something had passed through fire and come out whole. She sat among them, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged to herself. And no one tried to take that from her again.